Alright guys, welcome back. We are up to our third dictator in our series on the rise of the dictators before World War II. And today we're going to talk about the man who's probably the most infamous on the list, and that of course is Adolf Hitler. And we're going to look at him and the rise of his political party called the Nazi Party. So let's get into the background of Hitler's rise to power. Once again, just as a quick review, we have covered Mussolini and Stalin now. We're going to do Hitler this time. And then in the next video, we'll wrap up the unit by looking at militarism in Japan. Alright, so let's get some background as to why Germany was a place that was vulnerable to the kind of takeover that we're going to see with the Nazis. And that brings us to something called the Weimar Republic. Okay, the Weimar Republic took over Germany after the monarchy ended during World War I. And it's known as the Weimar Republic because of where it first met the city of Weimar. Now you'll notice something about Germany. It's in two pieces, right? We've got most of Germany here, and then this little piece over here called East Prussia. And this right through here, which had been part of the German Empire, was taken away from Germany after World War I to create Poland. And that is something we're going to talk more about when we get to World War II. Okay, so what was the Weimar Republic? And it was really the first big parliamentary democracy we saw in German history, and so they don't really have a lot of experience with this thing, and it tended to be on the weak side and also unstable. And one of the reasons it was so unstable is, as you can see, there were many political parties, and as you can tell from the red, some of the political parties were actually opposed to democracy. So if you have about a third of the entire parliament saying democracy is bad, that is a real problem, and that's a real danger to the future of that democracy. So let's go back over Germany's feeling of humiliation from World War I. You might recall that they lost land. I just mentioned that area over here that was given to Poland. They also they were limited to a very small military, and in general they just were left feeling bitter about the war. They had to pay for the war, those massive reparation payments, and they also had to accept sole guilt for the war. And Germany is falling on hard times by the early 1920s. In fact, things get so bad that Germany can't pay their bills, by which I mean the reparation payments, and in response, France marches troops in to occupy something called the Ruhr Valley, which is right here. It's right in the heart of the German economy. Okay, that's where a lot of the mines and factories are located, and for France to be sitting on that territory was infuriating for German nationalists. Germans were angry. They felt as though they were being punished unfairly for World War I. Now, with the Germans falling behind on their payments, they came to the conclusion that the only way they can really pay their bills was to print more and more and more currency. And that is going to result in inflation. Inflation occurs when prices go up and the value of your currency goes down. And so the Weimar government starts printing out massive amounts of money, and the value of the German mark, that was the name of their currency, dropped dramatically. How dramatically? Well, let me show you the numbers. From our graph, you can see that in 1914, basically $1 American dollar would equal 4.2 German marks. Again, mark is the name of their currency. By November of 1923, that same American dollar was now worth about 4.2 trillion marks. Now you might think, well gosh, that means if you go to Germany with American dollars, you'll instantly become rich. And that's not really true, because the purchasing power of that 4.2 trillion was about the same as it was at 4.2 marks in 1914. So the value of the currency has gone way, way, way down. In other words, to put it more simply, it would still take this amount of money to buy small things. And so because people's savings and wages don't go up with the inflation of the currency, people's life savings were wiped out, and the currency itself becomes less valuable than the paper it's printed on. And when you are in a situation in which stacks of cash are not even worth anything other than just for kids to play with, you might start to call into question the purpose of your government and why it is doing what they're doing. And from the German perspective, some Germans anyways, they were saying, well, gosh, this experimentation with democracy is just not working very well. Maybe democracy is not for us. So that brings us to main idea number 2. That is, of course, Hitler and his plan, air quotes, plan, to fix Germany's economy and political system. A little bit of background on Hitler. There are his parents. If you ever wondered what his parents looked like, I doubt you ever have. The building he was born in still stands in Austria today. And here is the first image ever of Hitler. Baby Hitler. Now, Hitler was born in 1889 in Austria. He dropped out of high school. His goal early on in his young adulthood was to become an artist. And I'll show you some of his paintings here in a second. They're not bad, but they're not up to the level of being an elite artist. And so Hitler didn't get into the best art schools, and he felt very much victimized because of that. He moves to Germany in 1913, and a year later, World War I begins, and he fights for Germany in World War I. A couple of Hitler paintings that have survived. You can see his signature down here. Here's another one. Again, there's the signature. There's another Hitler painting. Again, they're not great. They're not terrible. But they were not good enough, I guess we'll say, for him to become a skilled artist and a successful artist. Here is Hitler as a soldier in the First World War. There, and there, and there, and there. So after the war, Hitler is, frankly, kind of just lost in life, bouncing from this to that, not really finding a purpose. And eventually he does find a purpose. He went to see this new political party that was being set up. At the time, it was a very small political party called the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or Nazi for short. And Hitler really kind of fell in love with their philosophy, and he joined. He was one of the earlier members to join this small political party. And he loved the idea of fighting back against communism, which he hated, and making Germany strong and powerful again. Now, what helped Hitler to rise through the ranks in the Nazi Party and gain more followers for the political party was his speaking gifts. He was a very charismatic speaker in the sense that he put on quite a spectacle. And I'm sure some people went there just to see it. They could care less what he had to say. They just had heard about this guy and his speeches. A lot of kind of Mussolini-esque, right? Lots of flailing of the arms and pumping of fists and that kind of stuff, shouting and all that. And, you know, people, they bought into that stuff. And his message resonated with quite a few Germans. In 1923, Hitler decides to follow in the footsteps of Mussolini. So you recall, Mussolini had basically taken over Italy by leading his march on Rome. And so Hitler decides, you know what, I'm going to do this as well. And his plan was to take over the government in Munich, which is the second biggest city in Germany. And then he felt that a revolution would sweep across Germany and the Nazis would be put into power. This coup attempt was called the Beer Hall Putsch. Putsch is German for coup, and it was called beer hall because a lot of the Nazis met at local beer halls as they planned this attack out. Now, the coup attempt fails, and Hitler and his co-conspirators were arrested. He's put on trial. He's sentenced to only 5 years for what is, in fact, treason, and then he was released after just 9 months. So definitely a slap on the wrist for a pretty high crime. Here are some of the co-defendants of Hitler during their trial, again, after their failed coup attempt. Here's Hitler while he was in prison, and gotta say, it looks kind of cushy for a prison, honestly. Now, while he's in prison, he's going to team up with this guy, Rudolf Hess, and he's going to write his famous work called Mein Kampf. Kampf means struggle. Okay, so my struggle is basically the translation. And this book is kind of part autobiography, part political statement. It's full of hatred of Jews. That's anti-Semitism. It's full of extreme nationalism, that there was something about Germans that were special. He declares them to be a master race called the Aryans. And honestly, at the time, at least shortly after its publication, this was seen as just the ravings of a madman. But as Hitler grew in terms of power and eventually took over Germany, this became a bestseller and actually made Hitler a very wealthy man, this book. Now, in this book, he also expresses this idea that Germany was an overcrowded country, and it needed more land, more living space, as he calls it, to give to the German people. And the term living space is Lebensraum in German. And where is this Lebensraum or living space going to come from? He envisioned Germany expanding eastward. And he's going to choose Eastern Europe because the people there were Slavic, and he considered Slavs inferior. And so he would conquer their lands, take it from them, and create this massive German state where the Germans can then settle eastward and, kind of create this growing Germany that's on the verge of destiny in his crazy opinion. Now, in the 1930s, as we have learned, the Great Depression was sweeping across the world, including in Germany. Some 30% of all Germans were unemployed, and there were a lot of people who were frankly confused, saddened, frightened, angry. There are lots of strong emotions here. And Hitler's message of put me into power and I'll make Germany strong again, I'll bring glory back to Germany, I'll get revenge on all those countries that have wronged us, was very attractive to a lot of people. And this is the case with a lot of dictators. They prey on desperate people during desperate times, and they give them very simple answers to complex problems. By 1932, the Nazi Party was basically the biggest political party in Germany. Not in power totally yet, but they're on the cusp of power. And these are some propaganda posters here about about the Nazi Party. This one basically saying we workers need to awaken. Awaken meaning we need to see the light of the Nazi Party. This one over here, our last hope is Hitler. You have all these bedraggled people on the right, and their only hope, or so they're told anyways, is Hitler. By 1933, Hitler is named Chancellor of Germany. And this was partly as kind of a compromise with some conservatives in the German parliament. And they felt that if they could put Hitler into power, they could then use him and his popularity to achieve their own goals. In other words, they saw him as maybe a puppet that they could use to defeat communists. They didn't fully realize that they would not be able to control Hitler. So one of the defining moments in Hitler's rise to power comes on February 27th, 1933. And on that day, the German parliament building called the Reichstag was set on fire. A mysterious fire broke out in this building. And everyone is wondering, well, gosh, what happened? Was this intentional? Who did this? And so forth. And the Nazis immediately blame their political rivals, the communists. And they say, well, Hitler desperately needs more political power to defeat this growing enemy of Germany. We can't let the communists just march around any longer. We have to take care of them. Otherwise, they're a continuous threat. And so on March 23rd, 1933, the German parliament passes the Enabling Act, which basically allowed Hitler from this point forward to make laws and rules by decree. In other words, he doesn't have to go through a parliament. He could just make laws on his own. In other words, he is given dictatorial powers. So this is the point where Hitler goes from being, Chancellor of Germany, although he's still technically Chancellor, to being the leader, Der Führer. That's his title. of the dictator of Germany. Now, as far as who set the fire, I don't know that anyone will ever figure it out 100%, but there's a lot of evidence to suggest the Nazis had planned this fire so that they could blame it on the communists and thus give Hitler that power that he craved. I mentioned a moment ago that his title was Der Führer. It means the leader, much like Il Duce means the leader in Italian. That was Mussolini's title, if you recall. And so now we have reached the point where Hitler's gone from obscure political leader to the unquestioned powerhouse of Nazi Germany. And to demonstrate his power and the philosophy of conformity that is Nazism, you'd see these massive rallies where people would come and pay their respects to Hitler, and he would give inflammatory speeches, and they'd march around carrying flags and all this stuff. And, you know, honestly, some of this is still with us, right? Think of another country in which they have mass military parades and lots of extreme nationalism, like, say, North Korea. Kind of similar, all right? Here's another good example of Nazi propaganda. It was called the Cathedral of Light, and you can see these giant searchlights pointed up to the sky to create this just this almost like building of light around the parade grounds. All right, now let's get into Hitler as dictator, and we're going to give Germany a new name. Of course, it was still technically Germany, of course, but it was referred to now as the Third Reich. And Reich is the German word for empire. And Hitler declared it to be the 1,000-year Reich. It would last 1,000 years, or so he told us. It actually lasted 12 years. Another plan of Hitler's was to completely redo the city of Berlin and call it Germania, and it would be the world capital, because Hitler was going to dominate the world in his mind. Now remember, Hitler was an artist in his youth, and he came up with a lot of these plans himself. In fact, let me show you. The plan was to build this gigantic triumphal arch, and it would be right here, and it was designed by Hitler himself. That's a Hitler sketch of what he wanted to see in this arch. Now, not much of Hitler's architecture remains because of the damage that occurred during World War II, but one example I think is very interesting to look at because it's so tied to the philosophy of Nazism, and it is the Nazi Party Congress Hall in Nuremberg. If you look at the different stones here, notice how they're all different colors. And the reason for that was these were all taken from quarries all across Germany. And so it's sort of implying that all, just like how these pieces that come together from all across Germany to form a building, so do all the people of Germany all kind of fit together to form this new Germany. It's that idea that is part of fascism, where you as the individual don't mean anything except as part of the collective. So we mentioned that in the 1930s, the Great Depression was sweeping the world, and of course it hit Germany hard as well. And Hitler had promised the people he was going to put them back to work. And sure enough, unemployment does go down rather dramatically after Hitler takes over. And one of the things people were employed doing was building roads and factories and airports and weapons as well. And this is something that Hitler was not supposed to be doing. You know, rebuilding the German army was forbidden by the Treaty of Versailles, but he's going to do it anyways. We'll talk more about that when we get to World War II. Now, I mentioned highways. Germany had a great example of this, the Autobahn. World famous, right? Many of us have heard of the Autobahn. It's still in Germany today, of course. And what's famous about it is on many stretches of the Autobahn in Germany, there is no speed limit, which makes many Americans jealous. They want to go out there and drive. Now, if you're going to build new highways, you might also want to build new cars. And so Hitler and his people created this idea of a people's car. That's what Volkswagen means. And this was going to be kind of like a Model T for Germany. It was going to be an affordable, reliable car that all Germans could, in fact, purchase. The Volkswagen Didn't really get off the ground, though, under the Nazis, and the reason being World War II intervenes, and so very few of these were produced for the civilian market. That'll have to wait until after World War II. All right, so we've looked at Mussolini and Stalin already in this unit, and we learned that both of those dictators had secret police forces that could go out and spy on their rivals and instill terror and fear to the point where you would not even think a bad thought about Hitler or Stalin or Mussolini for fear of being turned in by even your closest friends. And in Hitler's case, his police force was known as the Geheime Staatspolizei, or Gestapo for short. It literally means secret state police. That's what that word means. The leader of the Gestapo was an absolutely awful human being named Heinrich Himmler. We will talk more about him when we get to the Holocaust, because he will be really one of the chief architects of that horrible, horrible event. Now, complementing the Gestapo was Hitler's own basically private army called the Schutzstaffel, or SS. It translates roughly as like protection squad, and originally the SS was designed as a bodyguard for Hitler. They were going to be the most loyal of loyals, right? The most Nazi of Nazis were going to be part of the SS, and they would be like this inner circle surrounding Hitler. But over time, it's going to expand. In fact, in World War II, it's going to be his own army, separate from the official army of Germany. And the SS often got the best equipment and the most training, and often committed the worst crimes and atrocities. You can see some of these soldiers they'll be fighting in World War II. They had a reputation of being some extremely tough and also brutal fighters. All right, now I mentioned the Holocaust a couple seconds ago. We're not going to get like really deep into that yet, but we're going to kind of put Germany on that path today. And so let's talk about anti-Semitism under the Nazis. In 1935, a series of laws were put into place called the Nuremberg Laws. Remember, Nuremberg is a city in Germany, and these laws were designed to basically isolate Jews from the rest of German society. So certain occupations, like being doctors or lawyers or teachers of non-Jews, those were banned. Okay, Jews could no longer hold office, and going forward, Jews also had to wear on their clothing a yellow star to identify themselves as Jews, so that everyone would be sure with who the Jews were. Now, things go from bad to worse. On November 7th, 1938, a German Jew by the name of Herschel Grinspan walked into the German embassy in Paris and shot and killed an employee there. Now, the background on this was Grinspan was upset because his father, who had been living in Germany for decades, was being kicked out of Germany back to his native Poland because he was Jewish. And Grinspan was furious about this, and so again, he goes into the embassy in Paris, shoots and kills a German worker. When news gets back to Germany that this has happened, it unleashes terror on the Jewish communities. Basically, from the Nazis' perspective, this was great propaganda value, because what they could do is they could use this example of a Jew killing a German and say, see, this is why Jews are dangerous and why they need to be eliminated from German society. And what comes out of this murder is the Kristallnacht, which means basically crystal night, but it's translated into English as the night of broken glass. And in this night of broken glass, there is an absolute chaos of looting and burning and beating and arresting that's taking place in Jewish neighborhoods all across Germany. And it really is, for a lot of Jews, German Jews, the wake-up call that, we're not just going to be oppressed, we're going to be really endangered living in Germany any further. And so some Jews who, had the means and maybe the foresight were going to get the heck out of Germany after this. They weren't going to stay around and see what else bad things would happen. So just so you can see a Jewish synagogue being burned, and then mass arrests and Jews being rounded up after Kristallnacht. All right, now let's Let's look now at corrupting German culture, which certainly the Nazis did. And we talked about how under Mussolini they had this fascist youth organization which was designed to brainwash and intimidate and program basically the youth of Italy. Well, Germany had a very similar situation. It was called the Hitler Youth. And in the Hitler Youth, you would learn how great war is. You would learn about how awesome it is to be a German and how that you're superior to others. You would also learn about how terrible Jews supposedly were, what a danger they are to the future of Germany. You would also learn about Hitler and his supposed greatness and why he was the man that's going to fulfill the destiny of the German people. Underlying all this, of course, is also getting these kids ready to go to war one day. So they're going to learn to march around, they're going to learn how to take orders, wear a uniform, do some basic marksmanship and that kind of stuff, and then one day go fight for Hitler. The German girls also had an organization similar to this, the League of German Girls, although their job is not prepare for war, it's to be prepared for motherhood. So yes, just like Mussolini and Stalin, Hitler was obsessed with having big families. And so the loyal thing to do is to have as many kids as possible. Here are the Hitler Youth marching around and doing some exercises and tug of war and checking out a machine gun. And you can see the youth here surrounding Hitler. You could definitely tell some of them have been a little brainwashed. Now, during World War II, especially towards the end of World War II, when Germany was running low on adults to go fight in this war, they turned to the youth of Germany, and whole military units were designed to be filled out with 15, 16, 17-year-old kids basically going off to fight for Germany. Now, Hitler and the Nazis were also obsessed with trying to, in their words, purify German culture. And that meant getting rid of things that the Nazis don't like. One thing in particular Hitler disliked was modern art. He saw it as confusing and corrupt, and he also suspected it was somehow a Jewish plot, because, in Hitler's mind, everything is a Jewish plot. He also hated jazz. Jazz music for him was seen as despicable and backwards and corrupting to the youth of Germany, especially because of its roots with African Americans, because Hitler was, again, a super racist. Hitler also, like Stalin, decided that religion was not something that was going to be long-term in Germany. Now, Hitler is not necessarily going to declare war on religion the same way Stalin did, but certainly even religious figures had to bite their tongue and watch what they said about Hitler. And ultimately, Hitler thought that Nazism would replace religion altogether, that Christianity would just fade out and be replaced with Nazi teachings. Okay, so that's all we're going to cover today on this video. We looked at the rise of Hitler from obscure World War I veteran to the dictator of Germany. And obviously his story doesn't end here. We'll finish it when we get to World War II. In our final video in this unit, guys, we're going to take a look at Japan and see what's going on in terms of the military taking over and turning Japan into a militaristic power.